Good day. It's Tuesday, July 15th, 2025. I'm Rory Mack, and this is your Daily World Brief. First up, North America, let's talk trade and inflation. The latest inflation reports are out, and they show prices ticking up, but not as dramatically as many feared. In June, US consumer prices rose about 2.7% year-on-year, higher than the month before, but still below the peak from January. This is happening even as massive new tariffs are looming on imports under President Trump's trade policy. In fact, Trump's been touting the good news, saying the economy is roaring, prices are down, and inflation is dead. Many economists had warned these tariffs would drive costs through the roof, but so far that hasn't quite happened. So why haven't tariffs sent inflation spiraling yet? One reason is that companies prepared they stockpiled goods before the tariffs hit, which helped keep store prices stable for now. There's also a lag before import taxes fully pass through to consumer prices, and businesses are hesitant to jack up tags when shoppers are price sensitive. In other words, retailers have been eating some of the costs to avoid scaring off customers. But this calm might not last. The Federal Reserve is wary that as those stockpiles run out, the tariff costs will start pushing up prices later this year. In fact, the Fed predicts its favored inflation measure could climb from about 2.1% now to 3% by end of 2025 if the trade war effects fully kick in. Washington is split. Trump insists his tough trade stance is helping the economy, while the Fed and many analysts say not so fast. The real test will come in the next few months as supply chains adjust. For now, consumers are enjoying relatively tame inflation, but everyone's watching those tariffs and supply chain kinks to see if they'll fuel a bigger price spike down the road. Shifting over to Europe, where there's major news on trade and some dramatic developments in the war in Ukraine. First, a big economic headline. After 25 years of talks, the EU and Mercosur have finally sealed a free trade deal. Yes, Europe and South America's Mercosur bloc, that's Brazil, Argentina, Uruguay, and Paraguay, clinched an agreement to create one of the world's largest free trade zones. European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen called it a win for Europe. The pact will lower tariffs on goods ranging from cars to agriculture, aiming to boost commerce between the two regions. It's a done deal at the negotiators' level, but there's a catch. It still faces a tough ratification process in Europe, where countries like France and Italy have raised objections, especially over environmental concerns and farm competition. So while the deal is finalized, bureaucrats will be doing some arm twisting at home to get it approved. Still, this is a landmark trade achievement that both sides have chased for decades. NATO arms for Ukraine. European allies are stepping up support, and we're seeing a new, more aggressive diplomatic push from Washington. Germany, for one, is boosting Ukraine's long-range strike abilities. Berlin has agreed to finance high triple-digit numbers of long-range weapons systems for Ukraine, essentially hundreds of homegrown missiles, or drones that can hit deep into Russian-held territory. A German general overseeing the effort said these weapons, expected by the end of July, will help Ukraine reach targets like ammo depots, command centers, and airfields far behind the front lines. Notably, Germany still hasn't sent its own Taurus cruise missiles to Kiev, but it signaled it won't object if Ukraine uses its new kit to strike assets on Russian soil. In fact, the German Defense Ministry said there will be no restrictions on long-range weapons, the green light for Ukraine to hit even outside its territory as needed. This marks a shift. After months of hesitance, Germany is now literally funding Ukraine to build the tools to take the fight to Russia's doorstep. Meanwhile, in a startling twist, President Trump has issued an ultimatum of sorts to Vladimir Putin. Reports say that Trump, frustrated with Russia's refusal to budge in Ukraine, gave Putin a 50-day deadline to agree to a ceasefire and peace deal. If Putin doesn't halt the war within 50 days, Trump is threatening harsh new sanctions targeting Russia's oil exports. That's a big move. Cutting off oil money is like aiming at Moscow's economic jugular. The Kremlin's response. They're not happy. A Russian official bristled that any such ultimatums are unacceptable. It's high-stakes brinkmanship. And it doesn't stop there. We're also hearing about an eye-opening phone call between Trump and Ukraine's President Zelensky. According to multiple reports, Trump actually asked Zelensky if Ukraine could strike Moscow and St. Petersburg, Russia's two biggest cities, if the US provided the necessary weapons. Yes, you heard that right. Trump was apparently exploring just how far Ukraine could hit back. Zelensky replied that Ukraine could conduct such strikes if it had longer-range missiles from the US. The White House later insisted Trump was merely asking a question, not encouraging attacks on Russian cities. Still, the fact this even came up shows how much Trump's stance on Putin has hardened. Remember, this is the same Trump who a while back was talking about cutting a deal with Putin quickly. Now he's floating the idea of empowering Ukraine to hit the Kremlin's backyard to make them feel the pain and force Russia to negotiate. European allies, for the most part, are welcoming Trump's tougher line, since they've long wanted the US to increase pressure on Putin. But such talk of strikes in Moscow is also escalatory, no doubt causing some jitters about how Russia might react if those strikes actually happened. For now, it's mostly rhetoric and signaling a mix of carrot and stick, with Trump promising more weapons to Kiev, paid for by NATO allies, interestingly, while waving a big sanctions stick at Moscow. We'll have to see if Putin blinks, or if this war of words just ramps up further. Moving to the Asia-Pacific, we've got parallel military drills ratcheting up tensions between China and Taiwan. Taiwan is in the middle of its largest ever military exercise, the 10-day all-out war game called Hanquang, aimed at testing how the island would defend against a potential Chinese invasion. And when I say largest ever, I mean it. This year's exercise is twice as long as last year's and involves not just the military, but civilians too. We're talking soldiers, firefighters, police, even supermarket staff taking part in defense drills. They are practicing everything from repelling amphibious landings on beaches to guiding shoppers to safety during simulated air raids in city centers. In one drill, grocery store employees had to usher customers into basements when air raid sirens blared, even rehearsing how to bandage wounds and deliver intel to authorities in an attack scenario. It's pretty intense, 24/7 training. The idea is to stress test Taiwan's readiness under realistic conditions, no scripted routines, but spontaneous challenges, as if a war with China erupted tomorrow. Taipei's also flaunting some new hardware during these exercises, like recently acquired Abrams tanks and HIMARS rockets from the US that bolster its firepower on the ground. Needless to say, Beijing is not thrilled. China's defense ministry dismissed Taiwan's war games as a self-deceiving trick by pro-independence forces, and warned that any attempt by Taiwan to secede would be a dead end. Tough talk, as usual. And China isn't just talking, it's flexing military muscles of its own around the Western Pacific. In the last day or so, Taiwan's defense ministry has reported a surge of Chinese military activity around the island. Get this, 66 Chinese warplanes were detected buzzing around Taiwan's vicinity in a 24-hour span. Many of those jets and bombers flew out to the Western Pacific, south and east of Taiwan, to join drills being conducted by China's Shandong aircraft carrier group. Essentially, Beijing sent a carrier strike group past the Philippines into the Pacific, and dozens of fighters, including nuclear-capable H-6 bombers, sortied around Taiwan as part of the exercise. Taiwan even released photos of Chinese J-16 fighter jets and an H-6 bomber in flight to show it's tracking them closely. The message from Taipei is, we see you, we've got a detailed grasp of all PLA movements around our airspace and waters. It's unusual to see Chinese drills on this scale. Taipei officials say this appears to be one of Beijing's largest ever sets of maritime exercises in the area, possibly timed as a response to Taiwan's own war games. And interestingly, all this is happening as world leaders have been meeting abroad. There was even a NATO summit this week where NATO called China a systemic challenge and an enabler of Russia. So Beijing could be signaling irritation both at Taipei and at Western pressure by showing off its military reach. For the region, it's a bit of déjà vu of the cat and mouse we've seen before. Taiwan boosts its defenses, China responds with saber-rattling flights and naval maneuvers. So far no live conflict, just drills, but both sides are definitely on alert. As always, we'll keep an eye on the Taiwan Strait, where one miscalculation in these exercises could spark a real incident. Lastly, let's head to the Middle East, where we dive deeper into our analysis of recent developments in Syria. In Syria's Swayda province, which is a stronghold of the Druze minority, heavy fighting broke out recently between local Druze militias and neighboring Sunni Bedouin tribes. This intercommunal clash has been brutal. Reports say at least a few dozen people have been killed in the violence so far. One war monitor put the toll at 88 or more dead after days of back and forth attacks. It started from something small, a kidnapping at a Bedouin checkpoint, local reports say, and escalated into full-blown firefights. The Syrian government, which, notably, is under new leadership in Damascus, after former President Assad fled during a rebel offensive, deployed troops and tanks to try to restore order in Sweda. And this is where Israel got involved. As Syrian armored units moved toward the Druze city of Sweda, Israel essentially said, "Not so fast." Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu ordered the IDF, Israel Defense Forces, to strike those Syrian forces to prevent a potential massacre of the Druze community there. Within hours, Israeli aircraft carried out a series of airstrikes in southern Syria, taking out several Syrian tanks, armored vehicles, and rocket launchers that were headed into the conflict zone. According to an Israeli defense official, this was an exceptionally large-scale operation for the IDF, the clear signal that Israel was willing to use significant force to shield the Druze. Now, why would Israel intervene in Syria's internal fighting like this? Two main reasons. First, Israel has a special concern for the Druze. The Druze are a minority in Syria, but also a well-integrated community in Israel, including in the Golan Heights area. Israeli leaders see the Druze as brothers. In fact, Netanyahu's office put out a statement saying Israel is committed to preventing harm to the Druze in Syria due to the deep brotherly alliance with Israel's own Druze citizens. Essentially, Israel doesn't want a repeat of past instances where Druze villages were overrun by hostile forces. Second, Israel has a standing policy about Syria. It does not want hostile troops or heavy weapons massing near Israel's border. By striking Syrian forces near Sweda, Israel was also enforcing a buffer zone principle. Netanyahu said the entry of Syrian tanks into the south violated the demilitarization understandings for the border region. So Israel claims these strikes were defensive and preventative on two fronts, protecting civilians, the Druze, and keeping that border area quiet. The immediate impact. It appears to have worked, at least for now. Shortly after the Israeli airstrikes, the Syrian regime declared a ceasefire in Sweda after reaching a deal with local Druze leaders to halt the clashes. Syrian forces that had entered the city paused their operations, and fighting died down as negotiations took hold. By some accounts, nearly 100 people were killed in the clashes before this truce, a stark reminder of how quickly things escalated. The situation is still fragile, and there's a lot of regional intrigue. Remember, Syria's government has changed recently, and the Druze, largely loyal to the old regime, are wary of the new Islamist-leaning authorities in Damascus. So this violence had a sectarian dimension and power struggle element. Israel stepping in militarily is unusual. It's one of the most direct Israeli attacks on Syrian regime forces in years. It could complicate international diplomacy on Syria, but Israel is making it clear it will act unilaterally to prevent atrocities or strategic threats next door. The UN has called for calm and dialogue in Sweda, and many Druze leaders actually prefer no outside intervention, hoping to handle things internally. But faced with the prospect of a Druze bloodbath, Israel decided to send a message with airstrikes. Now that a ceasefire is in place, all sides are watching warily. Will the peace hold? And what will Syria's government do next, or not do, in that restive region, knowing Israel's watching? We'll be following that closely. That's it for today's World Briefing. I'm Rory Mack. Stay informed, stay stead, and I'll see you tomorrow.